Chapter 10 of The People of the Black Circle by Robert E. Howard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The People of the Black Circle. Chapter 10 Yasmina and Conan. Conan passed through the hall quickly enough, traversed the outer chamber, and approached the door that led upon the gallery. Then he saw the floor sprinkled with tiny, glittering shards. The crystal sheet that had covered the doorway had been shivered to bits, and he remembered the crash that had accompanied the shattering of the crystal globe. He believed that every piece of crystal in the castle had broken at that instant, and some dim instinct or memory of esoteric lore vaguely suggested the truth of the monstrous connection between the Lords of the Black Circle and the golden pomegranates. He felt the short hair bristle chilly at the back of his neck, and put the matter hastily out of his mind. He breathed a deep sigh of relief as he stepped out upon the green jade gallery. There was still the gorge to cross, but at least he could see the white peaks glistening in the sun, and the long slopes falling away into the distant blue hazes. The Araxi lay where he had fallen, an ugly blotch on the glassy smoothness. As Conan strode down the winding path, he was surprised to note the position of the sun. It had not yet passed its zenith, and yet it seemed to him that hours had passed since he plunged into the castle of the Black Seers. He felt an urge to hasten, not a mere blind panic, but an instinct of peril growing behind his back. He said nothing to Yasmina, and she seemed content to nestle her dark head against his arching breast and find security in the clasp of his iron arms. He paused an instant on the brink of the chasm, frowning down. The haze which danced in the gorge was no longer rose-hued and sparkling. It was smoky, dim, ghostly, like the live tide that flickered thinly in a wounded man. The thought came vaguely to Conan that the spells of magicians were more closely bound to their personal beings than were the actions of common men to the actors. But far below, the floor shone like tarnished silver, and the gold thread sparkled undimmed. Conan shifted Yasmina across his shoulder, where she lay docilely, and began the descent. Hurriedly he descended the ramp, and hurriedly he fled across the echoing floor. He had a conviction that they were racing with time, that their chances of survival depended upon crossing that gorge of horrors before the wounded master of the castle should regain enough power to loose some other doom upon them. When he toiled up the farther ramp and came out upon the crest, he breathed a gusty sigh of relief and stood Yasmina upon her feet. "You walk from here," he told her. "It's downhill all the way." She stole a glance at the gleaming pyramid across the chasm. It reared up against the snowy slope like the citadel of silence and immemorial evil. "Are you a magician, that you have conquered the Black Seers of Yimsha, Conan of Gore?" she asked, as they went down the path, with his heavy arm about her supple waist. "It was a girdle Khemsa gave me before he died," Conan answered. "Yes, I found him on the trail. It is a curious one, which I'll show you when I have time. Against some spells it was weak, but against others it was strong, and a good knife is always a hardy incantation." "But if the girdle aided you in conquering the Master," she argued, "why did it not aid Khemsa?" He shook his head. "Who knows? But Khemsa had been the Master's slave. Perhaps that weakened its magic. He had no hold on me as he had on Khemsa. Yet I can't say that I conquered him. He retreated, but I have a feeling that we haven't seen the last of him. I want to put as many miles between us and his lair as we can." He was further relieved to find horses tethered among the tamarisks as he had left them. He loosed them swiftly and mounted the black stallion, swinging the girl up before him. The others followed, freshened by their rest. "And what now?" she asked. "To Afghulistan?" "Not just now." He grinned hardly. "Somebody, Maybe the governor killed my 7 headmen. My idiotic followers think I had something to do with it, and unless I am able to convince them otherwise, they'll hunt me like a wounded jackal." "Then what of me? If the headmen are dead, I am useless to you as a hostage. Will you slay me to avenge them?" He looked down at her, with eyes fiercely aglow, and laughed at the suggestion. "Then let us ride to the border," she said. "You'll be safe from the Afghulis there." "Yes, on a Vendian gibbet." "I am Queen of Vendia," she reminded him with a touch of her old imperiousness. "You have saved my life. You shall be rewarded." She did not intend it as it sounded, but he growled in his throat, ill-pleased. "Keep your bounty for your city-bred dogs, Princess. If you're a queen of the plains, I'm a chief of the hills, and not 1 foot toward the border will I take you." "But you would be safe," she began bewilderedly. "And you'd be the Devi again," he broke in. "No, girl, I prefer you as you are now, a woman of flesh and blood, riding on my saddle-bow." "But you can't keep me!" she cried. "You can't!" "Watch and see," he advised grimly. "But I will pay you a vast ransom." "Devil take your ransom," he answered roughly, his arms hardening about her supple figure. "The kingdom of Vendia could give me nothing I desire half so much as I desire you. I took you at the risk of my neck. If your courtiers want you back, let them come up the Zybar and fight for you." "But you have no followers now," she protested. "You are hunted. How can you preserve your own life, much less mine?" "I still have friends in the hills," he answered. "There is a chief of the Karakzai who will keep you safely while I bicker with the Afghulis. If they will have none of me, by Crom, I will ride northward with you to the steppes of the Kozaki. I was a hetman among the Free Companions before I rode southward. I'll make you a queen on the Zaporozhka River." "But I cannot," she objected. "You must not hold me." "If the idea is so repulsive," he demanded, "why did you yield your lips to me so willingly?" "Even a queen is human," she answered, coloring. "But because I am a queen, I must consider my kingdom. Do not carry me away into some foreign country. Come back to Vendia with me." "Will you make me your king?" he asked sardonically. "Well, there are customs," she stammered, and he interrupted her with a hard laugh. "Yes, civilized customs that won't let you do as you wish. You'll marry some withered old king of the plains, and I can go my way with only the memory of a few kisses snatched from your lips. Ha!" "But I must return to my kingdom," she repeated helplessly. "Why?" he demanded angrily. "To chafe your rump on gold thrones, and listen to the plaudits of smirking, velvet-skirted fools? Where is the gain? Listen, I was born in the Cimmerian hills where the people are all barbarians. I have been a mercenary soldier, a corsair, a Cossack, and 100 other things. What king has roamed the countries, fought the battles, loved the women, and won the plunder that I have? I came into Gulistan to raise a horde and plunder the kingdoms to the south, your own among them. Being chief of the Afghulis was only a start. If I can conciliate them, I'll have a dozen tribes following me within a year. But if I can't, I'll ride back to the steppes and loot the Turanian borders with the Kozaki. And you'll go with me. To the devil with your kingdom, they fended for themselves before you were born." She lay in his arms looking up at him, and she felt a tug at her spirit, a lawless, reckless urge that matched his own, and was by it called into being. But 1,000 generations of sovereignship rode heavily upon her. I can't, she repeated helplessly. "You haven't any choice," he assured her. "You What the devil?" They had left Yimsha some miles behind them, and were riding along a high ridge that separated two deep valleys. They had just topped a steep crest where they could gaze down into the valley on their right hand, and there was a running fight in progress. A strong wind was blowing away from them, carrying the sound from their ears, but even so the clashing of steel and thunder of hoofs welled up from far below. They saw the glint of the sun on lance-tip and spired helmet. 3,000 mailed horsemen were driving before them a ragged band of turbaned riders, who fled snarling and striking like fleeing wolves. "Turanians," muttered Conan. "Squadrons from Secunderam. What the devil are they doing here?"
"Who are the men they pursue?" asked Yasmina. "And why do they fall back so stubbornly? They cannot stand against such odds."
500 of my mad Afghulis," he growled, scowling down into the vale. "They're in a trap, and they know it." The valley was indeed a cul-de-sac at the end. It narrowed to a high walled gorge, opening out further into a round bowl, completely rimmed with lofty, unscalable walls. The turbaned riders were being forced into this gorge, because there was nowhere else for them to go, and they went reluctantly, in a shower of arrows and a whirl of swords. The helmeted riders harried them, but did not press in too rashly. They knew the desperate fury of the hill tribes, and they knew, too, that they had their prey in a trap from which there was no escape. They had recognized the hillmen as Afghulis, and they wished to hem them in and force a surrender. They needed hostages for the purpose they had in mind. Their emir was a man of decision and initiative. When he reached the Gurashah Valley and found neither guides nor emissary waiting for him, he pushed on, trusting to his own knowledge of the country. All the way from Secunderam there had been fighting, and tribesmen were licking their wounds in many a crag-perched village. He knew there was a good chance that neither he nor any of his helmeted spearmen would ever ride through the gates of Secunderam again, for the tribes would all be up behind him now. But he was determined to carry out his orders, which were to take Yasmina Devai from the Afghulis at all costs, and to bring her captive to Secunderam, or, if confronted by impossibility, to strike off her head before he himself died. Of all this, of course, the watchers on the ridge were not aware, but Conan fidgeted with nervousness. "Why the devil did they get themselves trapped?" he demanded of the universe at large. "I know what they're doing in these parts. They're hunting me, the dogs! Poking into every valley, and found themselves penned in before they knew it. The poor fools! They're making a stand in the gorge, but they can't hold out for long. When the Turanians have pushed them back into the bowl, they'll slaughter them at their leisure." The din welling up from below increased in volume and intensity. In the strait of the narrow gut, the Afghulis, fighting desperately, were for the time holding their own against the mailed riders, who could not throw their whole weight against them. Conan scowled darkly, moved restlessly, fingering his hilt, and finally spoke bluntly. "Devai, I must go down to them. I'll find a place for you to hide until I come back to you. You spoke of your kingdom. Well, I don't pretend to look on those hairy devils as my children, but, after all, such as they are, they're my henchmen. A chief should never desert his followers, even if they desert him first. They think they were right in kicking me out. Hell, I won't be cast off. I'm still chief of the Afghulis, and I'll prove it. I can climb down on foot into the gorge." "But what of me?" she queried. "You carried me away forcibly from my people. Now will you leave me to die in the hills alone, while you go down and sacrifice yourself uselessly?" His veins swelled with the conflict of his emotions. "That's right," he muttered helplessly. "Crom knows what I can do." She turned her head slightly, a curious expression dawning on her beautiful face. Then, "Listen!" she cried. "Listen!" A distant fanfare of trumpets was borne faintly to their ears. They stared into the deep valley on the left and caught a glint of steel on the farther side. A long line of lances and polished helmets moved along the vale, gleaming in the sunlight. "The riders of Vendia!" she cried exultingly. "There are thousands of them," muttered Conan. "It has been long since a Kshatriya host has ridden this far into the hills." "They're searching for me!" she exclaimed. "Give me your horse. I will ride to my warriors. The ridge is not so precipitous on the left, and I can reach the valley floor. I will lead my horsemen into the valley at the upper end and fall upon the Turanians. We will crush them in the vise. Quick, Conan! Will you sacrifice your men to your own desire?" The burning hunger of the steppes and the wintry forests glared out of his eyes, but he shook his head and swung off the stallion, placing the reins in her hands. "You win," he grunted. "Ride like the devil." She wheeled away down the left-hand slope, and he ran swiftly along the ridge until he reached the long, ragged cleft that was the defile in which the fight raged. Down the rugged wall he scrambled like an ape, clinging to projections and crevices, to fall at last, feet first, into the melee that raged in the mouth of the gorge. Blades were whickering and clanging about him, horses rearing and stamping, helmet plumes nodding among turbans that were stained crimson. As he hit, he yelled like a wolf, caught a gold-worked rein, and, dodging the sweep of a scimitar, drove his long knife upward through the rider's vitals. In another instant he was in the saddle, yelling ferocious orders to the Afghulis. They stared at him stupidly for an instant. Then, as they saw the havoc his steel was wreaking among their enemies, they fell to their work again, accepting him without comment. In that inferno of licking blades and spurting blood, there was no time to ask or answer questions. The riders in their spired helmets and gold-worked hauberks swarmed about the gorge mouth, thrusting and slashing, and the narrow defile was packed and jammed with horses and men, the warriors crushed breast to breast, stabbing with shortened blades, slashing murderously when there was an instant's room to swing a sword. When a man went down, he did not get up from beneath the stamping, swirling hoofs. Weight and sheer strength counted heavily there, and the chief of the Afghulis did the work of 10. At such times accustomed habits sway men strongly, and the warriors, who were used to seeing Conan in their vanguard, were heartened mightily, despite their distrust of him. But superior numbers counted too. The pressure of the men behind forced the horsemen of Turan deeper and deeper into the gorge, in the teeth of the flickering tulwars. Foot by foot the Afghulis were shoved back, leaving the defile floor carpeted with dead, on which the riders trampled. As he hacked and smote like a man possessed, Conan had time for some chilling doubts. Would Yasmina keep her word? She had but to join her warriors, turn southward and leave him and his band to perish. But at last, after what seemed centuries of desperate battling, in the valley outside there rose another sound above the clash of steel and yells of slaughter. And then, with a burst of trumpets that shook the walls, the rushing thunder of hoofs, 5,000 riders of Vendia smote the hosts of Secunderam. That stroke split the Turanian squadrons asunder, shattered, tore and rent them, and scattered their fragments all over the valley. In an instant the surge had ebbed back out of the gorge. There was a chaotic, confused swirl of fighting, horsemen wheeling and smiting singly and in clusters. And then the Emir went down with a Kshatra lance through his breast, and the riders in their spired helmets turned their horses down the valley, spurring like mad and seeking to slash a way through the swarms which had come upon them from the rear. As they scattered in flight, the conqueror scattered in pursuit, and all across the valley floor and up the slopes near the mouth and over the crests streamed the fugitives and the pursuers. The Afghulis, those left to ride, rushed out of the gorge and joined in the harrying of their foes, accepting the unexpected alliance as unquestioningly as they had accepted the return of their repudiated chief. The sun was sinking toward the distant crags when Conan, his garments hacked to tatters and the mail under them reeking and clotted with blood, his knife dripping and crusted to the hilt, strode over the corpses to where Yasmina Devi sat her horse among her nobles on the crest of the ridge, near a lofty precipice. "You kept your word, Devi," he roared. "By Crom, though, I had some bad seconds down in that gorge. Look out!" Down from the sky swooped a vulture of tremendous size, with a thunder of wings that knocked men sprawling from their horses. The scimitar-like beak was slashing for the Devi's soft neck, but Conan was quicker. A short run, a tigerish leap, the savage thrust of a dripping knife, and the vulture voiced a horrible human cry, pitched sideways, and went tumbling down the cliffs to the rocks and river 1,000 feet below. As it dropped, its black wings thrashing the air, it took on the semblance, not of a bird, but of a black-robed human body, that fell, arms in wide black sleeves thrown abroad. Conan turned to Yasmina, his red knife still in his hand, his blue eyes smoldering, blood oozing from wounds on his thickly muscled arms and thighs. "You are the Devi again," he said, grinning fiercely at the gold-clasped gossamer robe she had donned over her hill-girl attire, and awed not at all by the imposing array of chivalry about him. "I have you to thank for the lives of some 350 of my rogues, who are at least convinced that I didn't betray them. You have put my hands on the reins of conquest again." "I still owe you my ransom," she said, her dark eyes glowing as they swept over him. 10,000 pieces of gold I will pay you." He made a savage, impatient gesture, shook the blood from his knife and thrust it back in its scabbard, wiping his hands on his mail. "I will collect your ransom in my own way, at my own time," he said. "I will collect it at your palace at Ayodhya, and I will come with 50,000 men to see that the scales are fair." She laughed, gathering her reins into her hands. "And I will meet you on the shores of the Jumda with 100,000. His eyes shone with fierce appreciation and admiration, and stepping back, he lifted his hand with a gesture that was like the assumption of kingship, indicating that her road was clear before her. The End of The People of the Black Circle by Robert E. Howard.